Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to rain in the Central Valley. Um, I think one thing we need to keep remembering, though, is it's still a drought. And with that, welcome to the 530th Board Meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. And I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. And sitting on my far left, having made a successful trip on slippery roads all the way from Merced, is Carmen Ramirez, actually of Atwater. Sitting next to me is Jenny Lester Moffett of Davis. On my far right is Bob Schneider of Davis. And on my immediate right is Sandra Meraz of Alpa, who very wisely drove up last night. So it's interesting, kamikaze pilots on the road after a rainfall. We'll go to agenda item 2, which is the meeting procedures in order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and... Oh,
We have
hey.
a couple other things to do, Dr. Lyon.
Yeah, moving on here. You know, we're trying to cut some of the more important things out of the meeting. I'll now introduce the Executive Officer, Pamela Creedon, fresh back from Hawaii, who will show us a short slideshow of her travels and then introduce her staff.
I wished I could. It was beautiful over there. I was happy to hear it was raining here, though, because it was raining a lot in Hawaii. So across the room from me to my left is Andrew Altavot, our Assistant Executive Officer here in Sacramento, and next to Andrew is Alex Mayer, Staff Counsel for the Board. To my immediate right is Patrick Palupa, Senior Staff Counsel for the Board. To Hin, I don't know your last name, Hin. Hin Tran, who is standing in for Karen, who's out today, Executive Assistant for the Board. And to Hin's right is Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer here in Sacramento. And to my immediate left is David Coop, Senior Staff Counsel for the Board. In the audience, we have Clint Schneider, a couple weeks away, and I forget everyone's names. Assistant Executive Officer in our Reading office, and Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in our Fresno office, and I believe Richard Lunkarovich is here, Assistant Executive Officer in our Sacramento office, and we have a number of other staff in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jenny, please lead us in the salute. Thank you. Now on to agenda item number 2. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are also summarized on the computer screens that you see during the breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer, sitting over here. And with that, we will move on to agenda item 3. Are there any board member communications?
I have had some, but I will, I don't have them off the top of my head, so I'll tell them tomorrow.
I think I'll do the same thing. I'll be turning them in also for the minutes.
I'll just add that Jenny and I were on a conference call with the marijuana subcommittee that Clint Snyder put together. A great job, and I thank him for that and the organizational work that he's been doing there. Thanks.
Thank you. Sandra? Very good. I made a comment on the opening bit about being thankful for the rain, but some of the meetings I've been in have been concerned with the drought, and you're going to be seeing a lot more on this. On the 18th, and more than likely on the 19th, there's a hearing at the State Board, work that's the DWR and the State Board are doing together to address drought issues. And the truth of the matter is, these days, if you look at the receding groundwater levels and so forth, we've been in a drought for a long time, even those years when we've had rain. So it's going to be a big topic. Obviously, drought and the kinds of situations they're having on land subsidence and so forth does affect water quality, has some significant impacts on water quality. It's a confusing issue as we get involved deeper, as we are now in salinity issues. So it's a big issue in front of us. Board Member Constantino requested, I believe at the last meeting, that we have a presentation by the board at a future meeting, and I think that's going to be at some point in the future, talking about climate change and drought and all of those kind of things.
Yeah, we're working on that now. Andrew's taking the lead on that. And
Good. It's in good hands.
Yeah, so likely this summer,
Okay.
at least for the climate change. No.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll go on then to agenda item number 4. I don't have any attendance cards. Are there any attendance cards for this?
No.
For the public forum? Anybody wishing to speak to the board at this time? Thank you very much. We'll go on to the executive officer's report, agenda item number 5.
Dr. Lang, tomorrow we have a couple of items during the executive officer's report, but today it's just the report if there are any questions or comments. Otherwise, tomorrow we'll do.
I'm sure that we'll get them tomorrow. Thank you. We'll go on to item number 6. City of Sanger, Sewage Treatment Wastewater Use Facility, Fresno County. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider revision of waste discharge requirements for the City of Sanger domestic wastewater treatment facility in Fresno County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Since there are persons present wishing to contest this item, we'll proceed with the hearing. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of hearing procedures, with notice of public hearing and meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you. The designated party is the City of Sanger. The total times allowed for testimony and cross-examination are as follows. Regional Board staff, 20 minutes. City of Sanger, 20 minutes. All other persons are interested persons and shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues at this time?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll now begin with testimony by staff.
There it is. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Jeff Pyle, and I'm an engineering geologist in your Fresno office, and I have taken the oath. I'm presenting you today the updated waste discharge requirements for the City of Sanger's domestic wastewater treatment facility in Fresno County. The City of Sanger is about 15 miles east of the City of Fresno, and the wastewater treatment facilities are southeast of the City of Sanger. Sanger operates both domestic and industrial wastewater treatment facilities. And to be clear, this order today is only for the domestic wastewater facility, not the industrial facility.
Excuse me, could you step a little closer to the microphone? They can hardly hear you.
Yes. This slide was included to show you the relative positions of the wastewater treatment facility to the north.
We'll need to have you step closer.
Maybe you pull the mic closer to the whole thing.
Sorry, guys.
Not a problem. These mics are not sensitive.
Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. This slide was included to show you the relative positions of the wastewater treatment facility to the north and the percolation pond disposal area to the south, known as the Lincoln Ponds. It's about 3 miles south of the wastewater treatment facility. The Kings River is about a half mile east of the wastewater treatment facility and about a mile northeast of the Lincoln Pond disposal area. This slide provides a closer look at the Lincoln Ponds disposal area and the approximate locations of the groundwater monitoring well network, shown with red dots. The percolation ponds cover about 9 acres each. with a total storage capacity of 320 acre-feet. 3 of the ponds are used for effluent disposal, and the rest are used only for emergency purposes. An unlined canal is present along the western side of the property, as shown in light blue. This slide depicts the residences in the immediate vicinity and those generally down gradient of the Lincoln Ponds. The red boxes are the residential structures. Available well logs from the Department of Water Resources indicate well depths range from 72 to 200 feet below the surface, with screened intervals as shallow as 48 feet. A well screened to 48 feet below the surface draws water from the same aquifer that is monitored by the city's monitoring wells. The current waste discharge requirements were adopted in 1998. In 1998, the domestic wastewater treatment facility was expanded to its current configuration, and the Lincoln Ponds were constructed to allow for separate storage and disposal for the domestic wastewater. This slide shows a simplified diagram of the City of Sanger's domestic wastewater treatment facility. The domestic wastewater treatment facility provides secondary treatment and has a design capacity of 3 million gallons a day. The current discharge is about 1.75 million gallons a day. Generally, wastewater is screened at the headworks, routed through a sedimentation basin prior to being treated in the activated sludge unit. It is then routed for further sedimentation and then on to the Lincoln Ponds for disposal. The domestic effluent quality is depicted in this slide, and the BOD and EC results indicate good quality. However, the nitrate as nitrogen concentration in effluent exceeds the state maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams per liter by a factor of almost 3. A review of well logs indicate groundwater is contained in a coarse-grained aquifer dominated by sands, gravels, and cobbles. The general direction of groundwater flow is to the southeast, as shown by the large blue arrow, but the flow direction is influenced by mounding caused by the discharge, the presence of the canal along the western border, and nearby well pumping. The result is the flow is more to the east and northeast at times, as shown by the smaller blue arrows in the slide. The depth to water has ranged historically from about 20 to 50 feet, but due to our current rainfall shortage, the depth to water is now about 45 to 50 feet below the surface, and the city informed us recently that its monitoring wells have all gone dry. Wells MW1 and MW2 were installed as upgradient wells, but neither well was used for upgrading evaluation, as they are both affected by sources other than the upgraded groundwater quality. Due to the variable flow directions, MW1 is actually downgrading the Lincoln Ponds at times, and its water quality is similar to that as observed in other downgradient wells. MW2 is an adjacent and unlined canal that affects the water quality in the well. Wells MW3 through MW6 were installed as downgradient wells, but MW3 is also influenced by the canal. The city sampled a domestic well at the Lincoln Ponds in 1996 and 1997 prior to the discharge of wastewater to the ponds. The results indicate good groundwater quality with a nitrate of nitrogen concentration of 3.2 milligrams per liter, well below the maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams a liter. The 1996-97 results are nearly identical to the results from other upgrading sources and indicate good upgrading groundwater quality. The city has been monitoring at the Lincoln Ponds since 2000. The slide depicts the averages of groundwater results for nitrate as nitrogen since 2000, and I have included the 1996-97 results for comparison. The red line represents the primary MCL of 10 milligrams per liter. The graph illustrates that the city's discharge to the Lincoln Ponds has polluted the groundwater with nitrate as nitrogen. The main items at issue today revolve around the following requirements of the proposed order. The requirements for the city to complete and implement a pre-treatment program that was required by the 98 order but not completed. The requirement for the city to treat effluent so that nitrogen concentrations are less than 10 or demonstrate other disposal methods that will be protective of groundwater quality. The requirement for the city to evaluate the lateral and vertical extent of nitrogen pollution in groundwater and recommend a plan of action for groundwater to meet the maximum contaminant level in the future, and the requirement for the city to replace its dry monitoring wells in 2 years. We received comment letters from the City of Sanger and the Central Valley Clean Water Association, or CVCWA. Our responses to the individual comments are included in the agenda package. City of Sanger is contesting the requirement to implement a pre-treatment program on the grounds that it has a 1999 pre-treatment ordinance in place and that domestic wastewater treatment facility receives domestic waste. The board generally requires all publicly owned treatment plants that treat an average of 5 million gallons a day or more to develop and implement pre-treatment programs. The board also imposes this requirement on treatment plants that treat less than 5 million gallons a day when the board deems it appropriate. Pre-treatment programs address the discharge of industrial waste into the collection systems. Industrial waste can damage treatment and collection systems, interfere with the operation of the wastewater treatment plant, and cause distinct groundwater impacts. For these reasons, it is appropriate for the board to require publicly owned treatment plants that receive industrial waste to develop pre-treatment programs to monitor and regulate those waste.
Let me ask you a question here. They say they have a local pretreatment ordinance. Apparently, it's not effective. Is that correct?
That would be my opinion, yes.
And so what are we asking them to adopt? Obviously, an effective pretreatment program, but that's over and beyond what they have. Is that correct?
We would like them to implement a completed pretreatment program, and I kind of explain that in the upcoming slides.
Okay. And you mentioned industrial waste, but what we're looking at here is are there domestic waste? Am I correct?
No, that's not entirely.
This is the industrial waste that are going to this area? What's going to Lincoln? Domestic waste or industrial waste? I'm confused
Mr.
now.
Longley, Dale Harvey, senior engineer with the Fresno
Right.
office. I've taken the oath. We're going to get to that in just a second.
Oh, in other words, I should wait.
10 seconds.
Okay, I'll wait. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The typical components of a pretreatment program include a local ordinance, a use permit system, a monitoring and inspection program, and an enforcement program. The ordinance sets the rules and regulations that will apply to the industrial users, while the other components of the program allow the city to implement and enforce those rules and regulations. The city has not been able to demonstrate that the domestic wastewater treatment facility does not receive industrial discharges. The city built its industrial wastewater treatment facility to deal with a few large food processors, not necessarily to receive all the industrial waste generated in the city. At the time the 1998 waste discharge requirements were adopted, industrial dischargers were connected to both wastewater treatment facilities. That is why these waste discharge requirements required the city to develop a pre-treatment program. The city submitted in 1999 a copy of an ordinance it adopted in that same year. Board staff, working with the Office of Chief Counsel, reviewed this draft ordinance and found that it did not meet all the requirements of a pre-treatment program. In June 2004, board staff notified the city that its pre-treatment program was incomplete, although the city stated that it would submit a revised pre-treatment program by January 2005. A revised pre-treatment program was never submitted. In recent discussions with city staff, it appears there is a permit system in place. However, there does not appear to be either a comprehensive monitoring and inspection program or an enforcement program in place. Though city staff indicate that they review permit applications and look into those that seem like they may have a discharge of concern, this does not go far enough. To illustrate why the city's program is deficient, board staff reviewed the city's Chamber of Commerce website and identified 2 metal finishers, a metal casting facility, and a powder coating facility that were listed as doing business in the city of Sanger. When asked, city staff did not know which collection system those facilities were connected to or whether they even discharged into one of the collection systems. For these reasons, it is appropriate for the board to continue to impose the requirement for the city to complete an acceptable pretreatment program. The city is also contesting the time schedules for the city to meet the effluent. Oh, it didn't go up, sorry. I think this went one too far. do we go back? There we go. The city is contesting the time schedules for the city to meet the effluent limit for nitrogen or demonstrate other methods to protect groundwater quality. The time schedules were modified as shown on the right of the table, but recent discussions with city staff indicate they are still opposed to the time schedules presented for tasks A and B. Task A requires the city to submit a work plan and implementation schedule to meet an effluent nitrogen limit of 10 milligrams per liter or demonstrate other disposal storage methods that will be protective of groundwater quality. Task B requires the city to begin implementation of the improved work plan and schedule. In our opinion, 12 months is sufficient to draft a work plan that identifies the specific measures the city will propose and a 2-year time period to begin the implementation of the proposed measures does not seem unreasonable due to the existing groundwater pollution and the nearby residential properties. City is also contesting the time schedules that require the city to submit a work plan to define the lateral and vertical extent of groundwater pollution and estimate how long it will take to mitigate that groundwater pollution. Time schedules were modified as shown on the right of the table, and recent discussions with the city staff indicate they are okay with the revised tasks C and D, but again, opposed to the time schedules presented in task A and B. Task A requires the city to submit a work plan and time schedule that identifies the methods to assess the lateral and vertical extent of nitrate as nitrogen pollution. Task B requires the city to submit a technical report that describes the horizontal and vertical extent of nitrate nitrogen pollution and provide an estimate of how long it will take groundwater to meet applicable water quality objectives. City indicates it needs 4 years to submit a work plan as it must first replace its groundwater monitoring well network. Again, 12 months is sufficient to prepare a work plan on how the city will assess the extent of nitrogen pollution in groundwater. 7 years to submit a technical report that addresses the pollution and how the city will deal with it is unreasonable for the residents that live near or down gradient of the Lincoln Ponds. 4 years allows the city's 2 years of monitoring with the replacement wells to assess the lateral and vertical extent of groundwater pollution and propose a course of action for groundwater to meet applicable water quality objectives. The city is contesting the time frame for replacement of the monitoring wells of 2 years. Replacement of the groundwater monitoring network is vital so the city can continue to monitor nitrate as nitrogen trends in groundwater. The wells required for this provision can be used to address the requirements of the previous provision to evaluate the lateral and horizontal extent of pollution as well. The intent isn't to replace all of the wells in the exact locations as the previous well network. Previous data can be used for part of the assessment. Some wells could be installed near former wells, while others could be installed down gradient to assess the vertical extent of nitrate as nitrogen pollution. This slide addresses Civiqua's concerns. After reviewing the response to comments in the agenda package, Civiqua did not believe that the packages adequately recognized the potential role of CV salts in helping Sanger explore collaborative solutions to the city's groundwater nitrate nitrogen issues. To remedy this, staff is proposing a late revision to the response to comments. You should have a copy of the late revision before you. Civiqua has reviewed the proposed language and has informed staff that it satisfies its concerns. In closing, the pretreatment program is necessary so the city can manage its users and protect the city from discharges of potentially hazardous materials. The discharge to the Lincoln Ponds has polluted the underlying groundwater with nitrate as nitrogen, and the groundwater is used by nearby residents as a drinking water source. The time schedules to write the work plans and submit implementation reports are reasonable given the groundwater pollution. Replacement of the monitoring well network is necessary to continue to monitor the extent of groundwater pollution from the city's discharge. This ends my presentation, and we respectfully request that you adopt the tentative waste discharge requirements as proposed and incorporate the late revision into the response to comments. This ends my presentation at this time. So I'd like to submit my presentation, the agenda materials, and the case file into record.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions by board members? Carmen?
I might have questions, but I think I want to hear what the city of Sanger has to say first.
Okay, Jenny?
Just a quick question about the industrial waste. In their monitoring wells, are they also testing for some of those chemicals that might have been used in those industrial wastes that you were referencing? And if so, what are the results of those?
Well, they do monitor around their industrial facility now. The orders are old and they don't have robust monitoring and reporting. The new order requires a little bit more to look at the potential discharge.
But does the new order require those things that you might expect from an industrial facility that they have within their city boundary?
The new order requires what would be typical for a wastewater treatment plant that does have
Okay.
industrial users.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions?
Actually, I do want to just
Yes,
ask
go ahead,
this-
Carmen.
This late revision that references CV salts, did you get a chance to talk this over with the city of Sanger, and did they have any comments?
I don't believe we discussed this with the city of Sanger. We did discuss it with Civicla.
Okay, all right, well, we'll wait and see.
Yes.
Dale Harvey again. We did give this to the city of Sanger yesterday or the day before. They didn't have any comments. We did talk with CV Salts, and this apparently satisfies their concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Mulligan, I presume you're representing the city of Sanger, is that correct? Do you wish to cross-examine?
I have a presentation.
Good, we'll take your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and Board. My name is John Mulligan. I am the Public Works Director for the City of Sanger. I want to thank you for having me out today in consideration. I also want to thank the Central Valley staff for assisting the city along this process. We received late November the TWDRs into the city for comment, right behind the Thanksgiving break and Christmas break. So we've been trying with the resources we have, which in Public Works is basically myself and then my field staff. We brought some engineer consultants in to supply the comments, and we've thus far and met with the Central Valley staff as well and tried to work through some of these issues. It's a 15-plus-year-old permit. I'm fairly new at the helm, but I'm aware of these problems and immersed myself enough to hopefully be able to talk these fairly intelligently. For the most part, the proposed WDRs are acceptable. We do realize that our nitrates and nitrogens are quite high at the city. We're looking for methodologies to address this. Before the economic downturn, the city did have a plan in the high 90 percentile range to increase the capacity of the wastewater plant, and in that install facilities that would address these nitrates and nitrogens and effectively reduce them down below the 10 MCL. Currently, we don't have the funding for that. It's about a $35 million process. The city of Sanger is a disadvantaged community, small rural community outside of the city of Fresno. So we're struggling with the resources we have available. Some of our primary questions or contests with the current WDR is the timeframes that we just discussed, but also the pre-treatment program. When that pre-treatment program was put into the 98 WDR, that was coming off of a cease and desist with a series, and I'm going through the history that I've tried to learn, a series of consistent loadings that exceeded the permits, and the pre-treatment program was required. The city has put in place a very extensive municipal ordinance. It does have the ability to issue permits, and also allows for the director or his designees to enter into the facilities, to check the effluents, to shut them down immediately, disconnect them from the water and the wastewater system. However, we haven't been aggressively doing any monitoring in the lines of an industrial pretreatment program. Right now, our flows are about 1.7 MGDs. Traditionally, a domestic plant has usually a limit of 5 MGDs before they're required to put an industrial pretreatment, unless they have facilities that have been identified that need the federal regulations. We have not, on our domestic side, with the exceptions of the nitrates and nitrogens, our BODs and suspended solids have consistently met the permit. In my recollection, any exceedances of those have been internal with mechanical, and they've been quickly mitigated. So we don't see the need to have a pretreatment program basically for our domestic side. The staff did go through and look at the Chamber of Commerce's website and identify businesses that they thought, with their professional experience, would exceed. There is the Kings River casting. So they, the thought there is they cast metal. They buy all their stuff precast, and they just paint it basically on site. So they're not putting out. Adco Manufacturing, they manufacture machinery for boxes. Actually, they're not even on either of our systems. They have a septic system. They have a pretty aggressive recycling and reclamation pretreatment within their facility, and basically capture all their effluences on site. And we do have some other facilities. Our plant manager, subsequent to meeting with the board, has gone out and reviewed their effluents. We do have a pretreatment questionnaire that we send out annually. And I will say that it hasn't been done as aggressively. We had a person that was in place that quit, and we did not refill the position due to economic downturns. That was a little more aggressive on keeping those annual pre-treatment questionnaires in place. And basically what that does is it goes through and asks the questions of what their effluent characteristics are. We do require that to all new businesses. So we've had some positive economic upturns in the city. We've had some businesses that have come in. We had a dairy a plant that we were looking at, and that was one of our main concerns, is looking at their effluent characteristics, going through and then working with them on how they were going to pre-treat before they could hit our facilities. So these are things that we are doing. Our city's not very big. We have a handful of industrial users, and again, we're not here to talk about the industrial side, but we do have a handful of industrial users, and we work with them closely, and we do go out and do samples on those facilities as well.
Okay, if I could just ask, I know you said that you used to be more aggressive in requesting this information from existing users, but you had to sort of fell to a second position given the cut in funding. Does the city of Sanger consider that a priority? I mean, are you guys going to go back to sending out those surveys?
Yeah, I sat down with the plant manager and I said, we're absolutely going to have to send. We don't have that many businesses really that hit the domestic side that we would consider being in industrial type effluents. So it's not a big task. I don't even have a administrative assistant anymore, so it's kind of difficult to get things. We are moving forward and should be hiring a new person in the office, but and the reason I say it's not a priority isn't because we're not concerned, is because our historical data doesn't show that we have exceedances in the domestic side.
Okay, but given this, does it sound like the city of Sanger's sort of committed to making this a higher priority again?
Yeah, again, a lot of this information that's come to me has been with the receipt of this TWDR in late November. So it's given me a heightened awareness of the requirements. It's also given me a crash course on the steps that we need to take. We are mid-year on our budget. It's difficult right now. Bringing in a consultant wasn't something I had to add out of our reserves. So at this current point, as we move forward, the timelines that we're talking about later on in my presentation basically will reflect the ability of the city's resources to move effectively to address these issues. To further substantiate some of our information on where we looked at these priorities, the city also has combined sludge from our domestic and industrial plant. That sludge is hauled off-site. We're required to test it. We test it twice annually, and those sludge tests have never come back with any heavy metals. In fact, if they do come back with certain levels, they're not allowed to leave the site. So those have showed no significant traces of heavy metals. While we're not required to, if you remember the slide that showed our process, right after the headworks, we have a grit chamber, which basically takes out some of the heavier solid sands and whatnot. Those are actually tested annually, and that's just something we do internally to keep track, and we don't show any high heavy metals. There's a little bit of copper and lead in there, but that's pretty standard in a community where you have copper pipes and such. Nothing that exceeds any of the standards. Again, the city is currently complying with the BODs and suspended solids and other constituents within our permit, with the exceptions of the nitrates and nitrogen. The city does not feel that the extra costs and resources required to implement a full industrial pre-treatment program on the domestic side are justified at this time. It requires extensive quarterly reporting, monitoring, testing. We don't have an on-site lab. I have a very small staff at my wastewater treatment plant. So it would be implementing a fairly onerous requirement on the city for results that I don't think would be worth it. The Civiqua did make some recommendations on this provision. They at least asked for it to be modified to allow the city to reassess if a pretreatment program is needed for discharges to the domestic side, thus avoiding possible duplicative and unnecessary programs and costs. So basically what they're saying is if the need arises, maybe we open back up the permit and we revisit the pretreatment program. We're requesting it to at least have that wording, if not completely removed from the permit. The next piece is the F19, which are the specific measures that the city needs to put in place to address the nitrates as nitrogen. It's a fairly expensive proposition to go into our actual works, into the wastewater treatment plant works and address the treatment. It would require a fairly large capital project, which would take a lot of time to develop. So we talked about some of the other issues with the staff at the Central Valley office, and the wording has been changed to allow us to either address the treatment process at the treatment plant or to address it at the Lincoln Ponds area with methods such as agronomics, putting in certain grasses. We own fairly large amount of acreage around the Lincoln Ponds. We've got some agriculture there currently. We do our industrial side. The water is held in lined ponds at the industrial treatment plant, and we use that for agronomics currently. We have capacity for more water on those few hundred acres that we have as well, and we have the ability to valve domestic water from the Lincoln Ponds and keep it locally with our industrial water. Obviously, this will all take Title 22 work, CEQA work, permitting, et cetera. It'll take a fairly extensive work plan to be put together. And that being said, we're asking that while the local branch has taken care of meeting us part way on a lot of these time frames, we're still asking a little more time frame up front, specifically task A and B, from 12 months to put together a comprehensive work plan on how we're going to address this problem, from 12 months and an additional 6 months to 18 months. So that would be a year and a half to get together this comprehensive work plan. That's getting the consultants in place and starting to put into play the plans, get the plans approved by the board, and look for the funding sources, which is probably going to be the biggest hurdle to face. Our wastewater treatment rates to the ratepayers are already relatively high for the region, and while we are implementing some retrofits right now with Johnson Controls through a performance contract that won't directly address the nitrates and nitrogen, we have a amount of capital there that's going to produce savings, so we need to identify funding sources. I'll probably be back up here looking for funding sources at the state level as well. So we're asking for task A for the work plan to be extended from 12 months to 18 months. And for the implementation starting, again, another 6 months added to that from 2 years to 2.5 years. The completion in 6 years we feel is appropriate. Again, these additional time considerations will allow the city to better comply, utilizing what we have as resources and funding. F20, this is actually measuring the groundwater contamination, some of the limitations. We talked about the monitoring wells being dry. Those have recently gone dry. The visual that you saw that was presented showed a canal that runs directly adjacent on the west side of our facility. Just across a few hundred yards is also another large canal, and then about 1.5 miles you have the Kings River. All three, the two canals from the Consolidated Irrigation District did not run water last year. I'm not sure that they're going to run any water this year. Pine Flat Lake, which is on the top of the Kings River, is at 15% capacity right now. It looks like a big mud puddle. So right now, regardless of the rain that's falling today, I don't think that we're going to have any additional water to recover those monitoring wells. But we're working with Ken Schmidt. We've done quite a few studies with him in the past, and we're working with him now on an issue about groundwater recharge for the region. We're looking at doing a comprehensive recharge program for our overdraft. We're also utilizing him at the Lincoln Ponds currently. It will take some time to get together this plan as well, but we will need to have monitoring wells put in place. So we feel that, again, we agree with the WDRs for the most part, except with the compliance schedule. So what we're looking at here is to ensure groundwater quality is the task A be extended from 1 year to 2 years. Because what we'll need to do before we can start measuring the extent of this is we're going to have to get data back. So really F20, provision F20 really hinges on the next provision F21, which is the monitoring wells. So we will need to get the monitoring wells in place to do the study on whether the monitoring wells will recover in time, or whether we need where and how many new monitoring wells will need to be put in place, get those monitoring wells put into place, start receiving the data back before we can really start looking at the extent of the nitrates and nitrogen in the groundwater. So we're looking at task A from 1 year to 2 years. Task B, we feel 4 years is appropriate, and we feel that the annual progress reports that have been put in there are appropriate, and also the finalization as required by the executive officer is appropriate. So really what we're looking there is just the work plan, getting an extension on the time frame. Provision F21 is the monitoring network. We currently have 6 monitoring wells, as was discussed earlier. They all have recently run dry. We're as big as we're suffering just as much as everybody else with this drought. And with the canals running dry in the river, it's just taken our whole groundwater situation quite deep. We agree that a plan needs to be submitted and put together. It does take time. We've like I said, we've already have Ken Schmidt working on some other projects out at Lincoln Pond. We've already discussed this with him as well, and it's his opinion before we are required to drill any additional wells is that we do an extensive work plan and look at the current wells that are there. What is their recovery rate, if there is a recovery rate, to utilize them, and what's going to need to be done, whether it's 1 new monitoring well or 6 new monitoring wells. And so we're asking from that task A from 60 days, which is fairly aggressive, to 6 months. And that would be, we feel would be enough time to get that over to the executive officer, the local branch, and to get the required approvals. And then take us back to the F20, the provision that we just did previously, and get the monitoring and overall evaluation of the underground effects of the nitrates and nitrogen taken care of. In closing, the city of Sanger, we are a small, rural, disadvantaged community. We're currently rebounding from a down economy.
Can I just stop you for a minute? Could
Yes.
you go back to the previous slide? Your last one, task B, you said from 12 months to 1 year. Did you want to suggest to the board you wanted something different? 'Cause
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hit that. From 12 months to 1 year. I'm sorry, that's,
I think I'd be agreeable to that.
Well, I don't think that's what he wanted, so I just want to make
no,
sure.
I'm sorry, that would be from 12 months to 18 months. I'm sorry, thank you, and I apologize for that. As I went through this, I kind of struggled whether I should follow their months and days, months and years, or
I'm
just
just
put years.
making sure you're clear with the board what you want.
I appreciate that, thank you. So again, in conclusion, we're a small disadvantaged community. We're aware of the problem of the nitrates and nitrogen. We'll work as closely as possible with the local branch to address these. We'll look at any pilot programs. Prior to this discussion, when Civiqua made their comments, I was not aware of their organization or their push to address these issues. So I had the engineer, Mondo Garza with Canon, contact them and discuss kind of the programs. I didn't see their addition until I believe it was yesterday, yesterday afternoon, I came up to Sacramento. I don't have any opposition to that. I think the CV Salts program is interesting, and I'm going to be following it closely to see how we can implement any of those changes in the city. Again, we want to be regionally responsible. Again, we're also part of the Kings River Basin on the water side, and we're looking for aggressive recharging of the water basin also. So these are issues that we're concerned about and we want to address. However, we don't have the resources or the staff to really move quickly to address this. This permit's been in place for 15 years, and the data that's been produced, while we're not required to submit nitrogen, where it would show 29 nitrates as nitrogen to the board, we have been submitting that data for quite a few years. So this isn't a new problem, but it has become an aggressive approach to getting it taken care of as of this late November. We'll do everything we can to comply, but it takes time and it takes resources. Again, we agree with the majority of the requirements that are stated in the TWDR. We just feel we need a little more time to get them in place. We do not feel that the industrial pretreatment program, as stated, is required. Our city code, municipal code, is quite extensive. It details all the pH levels, all the heavy metals, all the temperatures, and the other pieces that can go into the wastewater treatment. It gives the director ability to go in and shut the facilities down. It gives us the ability to issue permits, which we're not currently doing. So I think all the pieces are in place that are appropriate for a domestic wastewater treatment plant. If and when we open up the industrial side, I think that would be a better time to discuss a more comprehensive industrial pretreatment program and the monitoring and what is required for such a program. But we don't feel that the domestic side warrants that, other than going out and looking at the Chamber of Commerce's website and looking at some businesses that they think have it. We've gone out and actually the plant manager's gone out this week and reported back to me that none of these he feels are extensive and in any danger of causing us to exceed the permit right now on the domestic side. And if there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Certainly. Any questions from board members? Yes, Carmen?
Do you think that the continuance that you're requesting could be justified to the residents that are down gradient? So the people that live there, you think that if you had the opportunity to talk to them and if they knew the seriousness of this nitrate problem, do you think that they would feel that the city's request is justified?
That's a good question. Our records, well, they talked about the down gradient in some of the video or the arrows that they showed. Some of our records show the down gradient. It is actually variable. Our records tend to show that it actually travels southwest as opposed to southeast. There are a few residents out there, rural. I think to answer your question, they probably they may not be, just because of their misunderstanding of nitrates as nitrogen, but I would think that knowing how our water side system works, and if we have nitrates in our wells, how quickly we need to take them offline, they probably would want it done as quickly as possible.
So you think that what the city's asking for could be justified given everything that the city is?
I feel it's justified because, while we will do our best to meet the timelines that are put forth, it's going to be very difficult to meet them, and it might put us into a position where we're just getting, all of a sudden we're starting to get fines from the board and whatnot, because again, we don't have a lot of resources. We're getting this mid-year. I don't have any of these consultant fees, work planned in any of my budgets. So I'll be going to limited reserves to address them, and I need to move these through council. Council is aware of that. I'm up here today, and I'll be reporting back to them tonight on some of the responses. But again, it's not just trying to buy time. It's more of trying to assure that we can effectively take care of the issue.
And you've already started sort of talking to some consultants, telling them this might be coming down the pike. You're going to have, the time, and I guess, you're going to have consultants look at this right away. You just think that you need the time to sort of find the money and do the planning.
I didn't bring, Armando Garza was formerly with Corolla. Corolla did extensive work on our master plan for expansion. They're very aware of our operations. Armando Garza came from, he's now with Canon. I didn't bring him today. I didn't think I needed to. Again, I have to pay him for that time to come. He's very aware of our situation in our plant and the operations. And also Ken Schmidt, he's very aware of the Central Valley's water tables. We've been working with him closely on an issue that we have with Consolidated Irrigation District on water overdraft, and we're already looking at Lincoln Ponds for some other issues. One of the things we're looking at Lincoln Ponds is using it for, because we have so many ponds out there that we're not using, and the soils are so sandy that the percolation rates are very effective. You know, the mitigation of the existing nitrates as nitrogen, we discussed with the local board. It should be a quick attenuation. We're looking at using those coming off the canal and flooding those with flood waters to address our overdraft. So that'll be bringing fresh water out there as well. So we do have the consultants in place working on other issues right now. It's just a matter of getting scopes over to them and then getting quotes back and getting that through council to amend our basically our budget. So.
Any further questions? Yes, Jenny?
Bob might first have a question.
Bob, do you want to go first?
I had a couple questions. Have you informed the neighboring residents about this issue with the nitrates?
We have not.
You have not. Would you be willing to test their water quality on their wells that they're using?
Yes, yeah.
So you need to inform them, I think. I mean, basically where I'm coming from a little bit is I'm not hearing much of a sense of urgency about this issue, and it seems to be rather serious to me with the nitrates, and particularly in the climate that we're dealing with. Have you guys looked at hooking up to Fresno and doing more regional approach?
Actually, we have. We not specifically had discussions with Fresno, but we've did some preliminary. We did some preliminary calculations on taking some of the small rural communities, City of Reedley, Orange Cove, Parlier, Fowler, and looking at the Sanger-Kingsburg, SKF Sanger-Kingsburg Fowler facility. We were having a discussion at the 5-city economic development group that we have on how much it would cost, and the cost is very extensive. It's a great distance. You know, it's very extensive. And I hope I didn't state that there was a sense of no urgency. Again, I've been the public works director there for about a little under a year. This came about. I wasn't aware, just from the standpoint of I haven't dug into the data that's come through that we've been reporting, as far as the effluent that is in the pipe before hitting the groundwater. That information has been reported back to the board for a few years, my understanding. We're not required to, but we do send that. This just came to my attention in mid-November. So it's not that there's a sense of urgency. It's a sense of urgency now, but I need to now get the scope into play and be able to use the resources that we have to address it.
I mean, we've seen on the board the difficulty sometimes that smaller communities have in dealing with these types of issues, and often the solution is a community approach. And you know, I mean, $34 million to do a new plant will buy a lot of pipe to transfer wastewater to, you know, a facility that can handle this type of operation and get it away from these residences in this nitrate situation.
The $34 million plan, I've gone through and reviewed the revenue sources, and it was really based on a huge amount of growth. We're just over 50% capacity right now, our domestic, and I'm projecting out, even with probably a 1.5% to 2% growth rate, we still have capacity for quite a few years on our domestic side. Our city manager, Brian Haddix, and our mayor are aggressively pushing for economic development, so we'll be looking probably sooner than later industrial expansion on our industrial side if they want to bring in the industries that they're looking for. But our domestic side, my calculations on that expansion, other than to address the treatment piece of it, the oxidation ditch, which would address this nitrates as nitrogen issue, I don't know how they justified that without having very aggressive growth. Our
I
wastewater
don't
plant.
think either of us want to try and figure that one
Yeah,
out.
we're already bonded pretty heavy on that side as well, so I just don't see how that would have happened.
Thank you.
Jenny?
So, right now, are there any industrial users who are discharging into the domestic wastewater treatment plant?
I don't know what the definition would be to considered as an industrial user, but we do have users of businesses on the domestic line. Our industrial line is fairly limited. It kind of goes out through our industrial park to our tech park. So we do have mixed commercial users on the domestic line.
Okay. And you mentioned a dairy, that's going into the domestic?
The dairy we didn't get. The dairy got, Tulare got the dairy.
Oh, okay.
Tulare got the dairy.
And then I have a question about the timeline. So you said this new WDR was not on your radar until November?
Yeah, I received it. I think it was the second one I received was I got one I think on the 14th. It was day the 14th and the 16th. So a couple days for the mail. So I got it, right on the heels of Thanksgiving. We needed to get back responses in early December, mid-December. I requested an additional week at least to get the responses back. I think we got the responses back on the 23rd, right before Christmas. I believe that was the date. But it was fairly aggressive. I needed to get together a team. I had to bring in different engineers so I could get quotes, to meet our purchasing policy, and then work with them fairly quickly, sit down with the board, which they accommodated, and sit down and go through the pieces and try to really get this lined up fairly quickly. So in order to get it on today's agenda and get all the pieces together, it was needed to be pushed fairly aggressively up front. I would have liked another month, but I understand that you guys I saw your agenda for the next 2 days, and it's quite extensive. So, we did the best that we could do to get some answers together and get me up here so I could at least take the city stand on this.
So prior to November, there weren't any discussions with staff. I'm just wondering, I hear what you're talking about with timelines, and I am sensitive to the fact that you are a city who operates under, an annual cycle, and if you don't have the flexibility to add in the budgeting that you need, that you might need a little more time if there weren't prior discussions, if it wasn't on your radar beforehand when you were doing budgeting.
Right.
But the timeline seems very condensed to me. We don't review a lot of the timelines for WDRs, so perhaps this is just the first time I'm hearing about that.
If I could answer, I think that the timelines were fairly compressed. But the other component of that is a lot of the updates that are included in this set of WDRs actually came about because of a 2006 report that was submitted by the city. Now, it did have those extensive kind of growth assumptions built in, that pre-2008, and I think the growth assumptions throughout the valley were a bit optimistic in certain cases. But these were updated partially based on that 2006 report. But yeah, the city is correct that the timelines were fairly compressed for this
But
one.
there's another issue here on the timelines. This is a serious problem. And I think other communities throughout our region, but particularly in the Tulare Lake Basin, which is severely impacted, should take notice that not just cities, other folks that are putting nitrate into groundwater. This is a serious issue that has to be addressed now, and we can't be kicking the ball down the road, which lengthy timelines can give that appearance. I do share the public health concerns that were brought forth by Board Member Schneider. I think you have to be very aggressive on that. Not only notifying them, but I think you need to be thinking of ways of possibly providing an alternative water supply.
Okay.
This is not something that we can say, oh, well, it's blue baby syndrome, there's not a lot of data out there. Well, there is a lot of data out there, and I can go show you tons of data out there, but it tends to be ignored. I think I appreciate you coming in front of us today, providing your testimony. I realize the city is under the gun in many issues, but I think your city manager and council have to realize, and I hope they do realize, that this is serious and it needs to move up on the priority list.
And again, the completion dates of all three sets of tasks, we're not contesting. We think they're appropriate. It's really just preparing the upfront work program. So the finalization of all the projects we're in agreement with. It's just getting the upfront work plans and the starting date of implementation. So we're not pushing that can down too far. In most cases, it's
Right. Well, my own take on your timelines, and I'd like to ask staff reply after I talk. I do think we need on the effluent nitrogen options. I do think we need that report back in 12 months. I do think, though, on the other work plan for the groundwater evaluation options, we could move that work plan to 18 months. You can focus on one and then the other. I see nothing wrong on the effluent nitrogen options of moving that to 2.5 years. We're sticking with the 6-year implementation time. And insofar as the monitoring wells, I really think you need to be able to do that in 60 days. We're not getting data that we need, and there's going to be a huge data gap. That nitrate's going someplace, and we have to be able to track it. And I happen to know Dr. Schmidt very well. I know he can do a job for you very quickly.
So,
My
Dr.
opinion.
Long,
My opinion only.
if I can add, the work plans are just to tell us how they're going to do it. It's not requiring them to have the information up front. So
Right.
it's just how they plan to proceed so staff can tell them whether they agree or not. So the longer the work plan takes, the longer it takes. There's always this back and forth with staff on these work plans, and that's why we want them sooner so we can get to the work itself sooner than later.
And I understand what you're saying, and I see that too, but, one of the things that, I guess I'll make my comments now so that staff can respond, is that we know that it's a work plan, but, these consultants aren't cheap. I remember when I worked at the city of Merced, we were scrambling for money. And so, as the city of Sanger stands here, they don't seem to be sort of bad actors that are, trying to get out of doing what they're doing. So, I know that the staff is going to come back up, and the comments that I wrote down is, I hope the city of Sanger knows that nitrogen's a really important issue to this board, and so 3 times the increase of the standard is really alarming to us.
Excuse me for interrupting, but in my own opinion, that really caught my attention.
Yeah.
They should have been reacting much sooner.
Yeah, so that is alarming. But having said that, I don't think that 6 months is unreasonable. I think that, I wrote down nitrogen is a slow-moving constituent. Given the drought, it's probably going to move even slower. I understand that Sanger has limited resources as a community, not only money, but staff resources. Sanger seems to be willing to act, seems to, now that it's been not sprung on them, but now that they're aware of it, they seem to be responsible and willing to take action. There's CEQA issues. I don't know that all the monitoring wells are going to be on city-owned property or public property. There might be some negotiating with private property owners that also takes time. The city of Sanger testified that they have relatively high rates given the income level of this community, and again the mid-year sort of time to act when the budget's already been decided. I'm certainly sympathetic to that. So I'm not necessarily opposed to the 6 months extension, because what I wouldn't like to see is seeing somebody who's really trying to sort of get behind on paperwork and then start accruing fines. That's kind of my thoughts out there, so I'll just.
If I can just point out to the board, what we were hearing today, I asked Clay, they didn't seem unreasonable to me at all, their request for extension. According to my conversation with Clay, they're a lot different than where we started with the city. So what they're proposing and asking today is much different. They're not asking for an extension of the end deadline. So that's to the discretion of the board. And I'll let Patrick, when we get to it, speak, and Clay speak to the pretreatment program issues that they have. But the timelines they're asking for here didn't seem that outrageous of a request to me.
Thank you.
But go ahead and let me add, this is Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in Fresno. I'm not necessarily opposed to some of the extensions and deadlines, but there is a caveat here. I mean, we put fairly aggressive schedules into the WDRs because this starts the process for the work plans at which they can implement. The most important thing is that the implementation dates don't get changed because we need to act on this. But if we extend the deadline for work plans, then it creates some other issues. For instance, they can't start, if they need offsite wells, they can't start the negotiation for access until they know where the wells are and the work plans are reviewed. So if there are problems, if we extend the deadlines too much for the work plans, it will impair the ability to implement. I mean, most of these are paper studies. They're not going out and doing field work to collect data. But it is important that they get out in the field and start to collect the data so that we can answer the questions and learn what needs to be done. And that is the reason why we had fairly extensive timeframes. And if we extend the deadlines for the work plans, then they will have to crunch things on the back end to meet the ultimate deadlines. And sometimes that's much more problematic in our experience than actually being a little more aggressive on the work plan so that you have a little bit more time to address those issues that come up with the implementation.
Well, another way to go is go with the timelines that we have in the permit now. Ask staff to come back to us when appropriate. Sanger can come back to us and ask us to extend those if they feel too crunched, but we would be expecting staff to give us their opinion as to whether or not there's been due diligence on the part of Sanger. There's funding issues and all kinds of other things that can come up. Something close to this is what I'm in favor of.
Okay.
Yes, go.
Yeah, I'll dive into some of this stuff here. And I think Pamela is exactly right when she talks
Just
about.
1 second. Are you through your testimony, sir?
Yes, sir.
Do you folks, just so we can be formal with the process, does staff wish to do cross-examination? No, I see you shaking of the head, thank you. Sir, you may be called upon for some more questions. You can sit up there if you would like.
Thank you very much.
Not have to stand there, and let's go on with your discussion, Patrick.
Yeah, so I think Pamela's exactly right in terms of a work plan being something that often introduces a back and forth between board staff and the discharger. If I were to look at this as objectively as I can, I think that it does seem to be very important to get that 12 months, what are you going to do at the plant about nitrates? 12 months seems very reasonable. And if they are exhibiting due diligence at getting a work plan to us in 12 months, then if there is a bit of back and forth, if there is an enforcement issue that crops up, that's something that you can certainly consider and say that, yes, the city was demonstrating that they reasonably tried to attain that deadline. For the component of implementation of that work plan, that may be reasonable to extend by another 6 months because of their budgeting process. That would be item 19B, because that will almost inevitably require a bit more of a capital outlay. You're going to have to spend not just money on consultants, but money on some upgrades to the treatment facility. Getting to the page 20, or page 23, the task 20, they're asking for 18 months on 20A, which is the work plan to assess the horizontal and vertical extent of the nitrate problem that's been created out there. That may be reasonable. Again, I think the board would have the discretion to kind of defer enforcement of that, or at least talk to Pamela and say, if they're making reasonable progress, give them another couple months to get that thing in there. Or you could just give them 18 months in the permit itself. I mean, that's entirely up to you. But I think it is important to hear from the city of Sanger that they are committed to meet the ultimate deadlines that we've put in this
Well,
permit.
your first option was basically what I said a moment ago, is to give them the 12 months. But if there's financing issues that are legitimate, we could reconsider.
The avenue that is the most expeditious is for them to, and I always suggest this of all dischargers who may not meet a deadline in a set of WDRs, is get what you have into the board, show due diligence, and then the enforcement unit can say, you know what, you've gone close enough, we're not going to recommend enforcement for this particular item as long as you get it in another 2 months, in another 3 months. I think that keeps keeps the pressure on, and it keeps the board's discretion to, if they do blow off that deadline, there's big time consequences for that. So that's my feedback in terms of what the deadlines are and the time schedules. I'll talk really quick about the pre-treatment issue out there, because I think we may be able to propose a modification that deals with the concerns out there. And again, as staff said, as Jeff said, a pre-treatment program is very necessary, because when you have industrial users potentially introducing chemicals and pollutants into a domestic treatment system, you not only have the potential to create things in the domestic sludge, in the effluent, that you aren't expecting from a traditional domestic discharge, but you also have the potential to create havoc in the treatment plant itself. I mean, we've seen circumstances where you have an industrial discharger, everything is copacetic for many years, but they've got a vat of volatile chemicals that one day spills, disrupts the whole treatment works, and creates a huge problem, not just for that day, but for many days to come. The sludge has to be handled as hazardous material, just a whole litany of issues that can be created by that. So what the pre-treatment program is to do is to get an ordinance on the books, and I think they've done that, or at least come very close to that, get a permitting system in place. I think they have that on paper, though they haven't been enacting that, and get a monitoring system together to have a professional from the city or an inspector from the city to go out to all the industrial sites that are connected to the system and just to double check. It may not require extensive monitoring of the constituents in the discharge, but it may be monitoring what your secondary containment is for certain constituents at the point of discharge, things of that nature. And I think it's important to note that pre-treatment programs really can be scaled to the size of the issues out there. So, if you have a lot of huge industries that threaten the domestic plant, you're going to have a huge pre-treatment program. If you have a couple minor industries, you're not going to have that extensive of a pre-treatment program. So I think that's the basics. And I would say that if the city can demonstrate that there aren't anything, any non-domestic, because industrial is tough to classify sometimes, but any non-domestic discharges into the system, if they can say we don't really have any of those that could create issues, then potentially you can get out of this kind of pre-treatment program that we've outlined in the permit. If we were to go in that direction, I would suggest that the board add a provision, and we could get some feedback from the city of Sanger whether they'd be amenable to this, but get a provision into the permit that basically says if the city can submit a comprehensive survey of all the non-domestic discharges into their system and demonstrate that none of these industries would cause the issues that we're concerned about in items 17, 16, and 18 in the draft WDRs, then that satisfies the board for the purposes of what they need to do for a pre-treatment program. And they don't have to have the extensive investigation and continuous monitoring that we'd normally require for a facility that receives industrial wastes. So that's one way of potentially resolving the issues. I think that what you've been hearing from staff is that the city hasn't been able to do that just yet. They haven't been able to say, we can verify that there aren't that many facilities that threaten the domestic plant or threaten to create discharge issues.
Well, it could be one, and that could be serious, but you have to be able to assess the threat. I like your idea. We can see what other board members say. I would presume that this would be, though, an ongoing oversight by the city to ensure that a new discharger doesn't come up that's suddenly impacting the wastewater treatment system.
Absolutely. It'd have to be a kind of a periodic reporting to the board that nothing new has happened. It'd have to be signed by a registered professional if required, and it would have to be signed under penalty of perjury, just to emphasize that there are very serious implications for committing that type of oversight. Or, of course, the city has taken a lot of steps towards developing a pretreatment program, and they could just bring that home, bring it across the finish line. We certainly have the authority to impose that requirement, and I think that's what the draft does.
Mr. Mulligan, could you come forward, please? You've heard the discussion. Do you have any comments on what Mr. Palupa has been outlining?
I think he did a very good job, and I appreciate that. Again, our intentions are to make this right. On the pretreatment side, to address what he said, that's where I'd like to get. I'd like to be able to have a better handle on what's going on in our dischargers, putting together a comprehensive listing of all the potential discharges to our domestic system. Certainly doesn't seem like a onerous task that we can't complete. Probably the bigger contention is this quarterly reporting and annual reporting of each discharger, and going out and doing actual samples, taking them into the city of Fresno and paying for all those to get monitored. If we could put together something like an annual report, we already send out this wastewater questionnaire, treatment questionnaire. We talk to the new businesses that come in, but it's just probably putting together more comprehensive and possibly an annual type of report back to the board that shows not only our efforts but also shows real results. I think that's very fair and equitable.
And then if we are on that subject, then I think that working with Fresno staff to make sure that that survey you sent out does sort of catch all of their concerns, I think that that's a good step too.
Yeah, and again, the person that we had on board to do that, I was in finance department, I wasn't even in public works, but I remember that she was started this process, but I don't know where it ever stopped. My plant manager now that I have, he goes out and visits the businesses on a semi-regular basis, and he does send out annually send out the questionnaires, but he doesn't monitor. My question to him yesterday was, how many of these do you have on file? Can I see that file and take it up? And he says, well, I don't always get a lot of responses, and I don't get it back from everybody. So I really need to, I'm going to, like I said.
That leads me to a statement, and listening to the board here, we'll see how the board votes, but there seems to be a great deal of concern about the impacts on groundwater. The pretreatment, obviously, you don't have the information. There's a great deal of concern about that. The executive officer has, actually was this an executive officer, I believe, addressed the issue of, down the road we can get, I forget who said it at this point, maybe it was Patrick. But regardless, that if you're making good progress, and it's reasonable given the circumstances, that they'll work with you.
Okay.
With that said, this board is terribly concerned, and I think that's a message that needs to go back to your council. Because if we get the idea that there's foot dragging, then this board has and may well in the future impose pretty stiff fines for this kind of thing. So you're caught between here. You've got to move the ball down the road. You've got to protect those people out there. You have to protect the groundwater.
I agree.
And so that's the message that we need to get across the day, in addition to the taking care of this permit.
And I agree.
Thank you. Any further questions? With that said, we'll take closing statements from staff.
Dr. Longley, I do want to clarify one thing, because the question was asked earlier, are we monitoring groundwater for industrial chemicals that might be of an issue? And the monitoring and reporting program does not have an exhaustive program to look at a lot of chemicals in each of the wells. We are monitoring the effluent annually for the metals that are typical of issue with the metal finishing industry and such like that. And we are monitoring the biosolid, the sludge, to be biosolids for compliance with the metals that are in the 503, the federal 503 regulations and such. The groundwater monitoring is more the typical conventional pollutants, nitrates and general minerals and such like that, but we are not monitoring groundwater. We have the ability to ask for that if we see the effluent is an issue. So I just want to make sure that was clear. With that, you want me to take? We recommend adoption of the order as we've proposed it. The late revisions were actually changes to our response to comments. In regards to getting groundwater monitoring wells in soon, we do want them in soon. However, keep in mind that the domestic wells that are in the area are shallow wells, and a work plan might include sampling of some of those shallow wells in the area, because as the groundwater is receded, it is down to the point where the discharge is occurring into the zones of the aquifer that domestic wells are being used. So that might include some sampling of domestic wells if that is available and such. So I don't know that we started far apart in terms of the timelines that we had from what we had proposed very aggressively in the tentative waste discharge requirements versus what they had asked for in response to the tentative requirements. We relaxed our requirements a little bit. They are now proposing items that are closer yet to what we had originally proposed. A little bit of slip. I don't know. Clay alluded to the fact that we got to concern ourselves with completing certain items timely and making sure we're addressing that nitrate issue out there. But if a monitoring program includes sampling of domestic wells in the area while we develop a better monitoring program, I think we could maybe back off a little bit on things like the installation of wells and such to meet the city's schedule, but we've got to be aggressive to make sure the nitrates are addressed. So with that, I would recommend adoption of the waste discharge requirements.
Thank you very much. Unless board members want to talk to staff at this point, I'll close the hearing and we'll deliberate and vote. Any questions of staff? Pardon? Nope. Yes, Debbie, do you want to talk? I was kind of surprised. I don't have a card for you.
And I haven't taken the oath, but I will tell the truth.
You promise you're going to tell us the truth?
I promise.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Debbie.
Chair Longley. Debbie Webster, Executive Officer for the Central Valley Clean Water Association. And I want to give you a little bit of background on our comments because it'll help you a little bit with the timeline. At least one of them. And when we put in that we really wanted to see CV salts or the potential for CV salts to be integrated into this process, we think it's really important. We think it's a potential, and I'm not going to say it's the right answer for Sanger, but it's a potential for the city of Sanger. As you remember, at your last board meeting in December, not the ones that you've been to in early January, we came here and told you where we were with CV salts. And there was significant technical work that had been done. And there were two study areas that you looked at, one that was around Modesto and then one that was in the Kings River area. And Sanger falls within that area. Now, one of the parts of the work plan is to look to see what the extent of the nitrate plume is. And there's a couple ways to go about it, but you can go out and you can put a whole bunch of straws in there and try to figure out what that is. Or you can work together, you can use some of the domestic wells, you can use some of that data, maybe minimize what you need to do, and use some of this really highly technical modeling that's been done. And so that's an option, and I've talked with Sanger's engineer about it, but that's an option and that they might want to pursue. That might take a little bit of time, it might not, they might be able to do it faster. I don't know the answer to that part, but that was one key part. The other key part is what we're looking for with CV salts is collaborative solutions. And Sanger might have a solution that works for them right there, but there may be a need and a desire to work collaboratively on this that might work out best. And we want that option to be available to them. So we appreciate the changes in the response to comments regarding CV salts. I think it addresses what we need, but we really encourage cities and others, to participate in CV salts because we think that collaboratively we're going to get at a better solution. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about the other. We did make comments on the industrial part, but I'd be happy to answer any questions otherwise.
I just have a comment. You're a great advocate for CV salts.
Thanks.
Any questions of Debbie? You're absolutely right, and I'm glad you made contact. City of Sanger may well benefit by working with your program. They don't have a lot of money for travel, but a lot of these meetings, you can get on the telephones, it's conference calls, go to meeting for some of the larger ones. So it's not that you're going to have to come to Sacramento or some other place to participate in the meeting. You can do it out from your desk back in your office. And so I think CV Salts has worked very diligently to be as inclusive as they can, and taking into account that some people have travel dollar problems. So, thank you very much. Anybody else who'd like to address this issue as an interested party? Well, seeing none, then we are going to close this hearing, deliberate, and vote. Any comments, or do I have a motion?
Well, I'd like to look at what Patrick had proposed as far as the pretreatment, an option for, I guess, avoiding pretreatment by the city. So I'd like to look at including that in the WDR. And then also, I guess there were two extensions that seemed reasonable. I think it was provision 19, task B, to move it from 2 years to 2.5 years, and provision 20, task A, from 12 months to 18 months.
I had mentioned that, but then listening to staff and hearing them say, let's hold them to the time plan, to the 12 months. If they have some issues, they can come back. I would be in favor of keeping that at 12 months, but I'll go with the 2.5 years.
Yeah, my only concern about that is I don't want the city to spend more time, I guess, going back to staff asking for extensions. I'd rather have them put that time into getting the work done.
I think what I heard is give us what you have. And they can grant an extension. I think they're going to be working with staff very diligently anyway. I see a lot of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all of a sudden they show up after 12 months. They better not just show up after 12 months.
Okay, well, I'm fine, if
Good.
I'm fine sticking with the current timelines,
Now-
but I would like to see the pretreatment provision or the
Right,
option.
and I need to ask Patrick a question on that. Do you have language, or do you need some time to put language together?
I have some language. I'll see if staff comments on this and says if I'm totally off base with this. But my suggested language would be, and actually before I get to the suggested language, I just want to say that we're in this situation because the board does have some discretion with respect to these facilities. If the facility was over 5 million gallons per day, it'd be open and shut. We'd be enforcing a pretreatment program. And frankly, this language sets a fairly high bar for saying why they would not need a pretreatment program. But I think it's a bar that the city might be able to reach depending on what they do out there. So it would add a provision 28 at the very end of the permit so as not to mess up the numbering. And would state, in the alternative to implementing provisions 16, 17, and 18, the city may submit a comprehensive survey to the board of all of the facilities that discharge non-domestic wastes into the collection system that serves the domestic wastewater treatment plant, including a demonstration that none of these facilities would threaten to introduce the incompatible wastes delineated in provisions 17 and 18. This survey shall be submitted under penalty of perjury and shall be signed by a registered professional as necessary. The survey shall be updated by 31 January of each year and shall include, as a necessary component, site inspections to verify that no incompatible wastes threaten the system.
Let me just comment on one little thing since he gave me the opportunity. Is one thing is I would suggest taking out that it only be to the domestic plant, because you could have industrial user discharge to the industrial plant as well. So maybe if we just struck that little part out about that, the waste discharge requirements for the industrial treatment plant actually require the development of a pretreatment program already from 1998. So with taking that out, the city was required in 98 to develop a program. They didn't quite get there. We had commented on the ordinance and such back in the early 2000s. With taking that part out and just say you have to show that you're not you're not going to get problems. You're not going to have problems. I have no problem with the rest of it.
Yeah, I think with respect to that, it may be a matter that would be better addressed when the industrial wastewater treatment plant WDRs are updated, because as we sit right now, they're behind on that requirement, the requirement to implement and develop and implement a pre-treatment program that was included in both the sets of WDRs for the domestic and the industrial facilities that were adopted in 1998. I assume the city will be submitting a report of waste discharge if they want to do away with that requirement, to have us update those requirements for the industrial plant. And if staff deems it appropriate, we could add a similar provision to the updated WDRs for the industrial plant.
So if I can, I guess I'm not in agreement with Lonnie. I think we should keep it focused on the domestic line. But we do have some monitoring requirements that are triggered, so how do we address those? If they're not going to do a tree treatment, then they wouldn't do the monitoring, correct?
And before you answer that, I just want to comment that I'm more inclined to go with staff's recommendation with the late revisions as they're put forth.
I think Pamela has a concern that I think we need to address. That's the monitoring issues.
Because we said 18, but we don't then say they don't have to implement the industrial monitoring, so we should do something to address that.
Yeah, I think you would be able to basically allow the executive officer to make the appropriate adjustments to the monitoring and reporting program, because that's something that falls within her delegation.
And do we put that in the permit?
It doesn't need to be. I mean, since we're making these changes now, maybe as part of that provision, you can say and removes those as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You can throw that in there.
Is there understanding of the late revision? Yes, Carmen?
I want to see it in
Bob?
writing. If we're going to go in that direction, I'd rather come back on this and have it written out.
Good. Let's take a 10 minutes enough.
Yes.
Good. We'll take a recess for 10 minutes. We need to look at language. Mr. Mulligan, do you have any comments? Thank you. Okay, fellow board members, comments on the proposed late revision?
I like it.
I like it too.
I'm uncomfortable with this. As we've heard, the reports have been pretty haphazard to date. I'm not convinced they're immediately going to be started this way, and I'd rather just go with the earlier staff's recommendation, but that's my take.
I've got a couple things to say if I can have the
Sure,
floor.
Carmen, go ahead.
I see where board member Schneider's coming from, because it does look like maybe the city had sort of hopes and just kind of faded away. But, I've seen, in my extensive experience as a board member, I've seen lots of people come up and say, hey, I'm new on the job, I just started, I need more time. And the city of Sanger, despite having less than a year on the job, they don't seem to be sort of trying to, dodge the requirements. I think that, to me, the city of Sanger is coming across as, hey, we know this is important, we're going to do it. So I like this alternative. And with discussions earlier about keeping the timelines as they are, I think I've been sort of moved into that camp. Because I talked about consultants earlier, and I do remember that consultants will a lot of times wait until they're at the threshold to say, hey, we're going to get this to you. And so I think maybe keeping the heat on them and the city to get this done within 12 months, I guess that's okay. But I do like that the executive officer has discretion to say, look, you guys seem to be working on it. We can give you a little bit more time if they are indeed working on it. So I don't think that if they show good faith progress towards it, I don't think it needs to come all the way back to us. Like Jenny said, I don't think we need them to spend their time coming up here and talking to us, but as long as that kind of discretion is sort of known to staff and that the city knows that if it's not progress that looks like it's in good faith, we've got, like I said, we've got, teeth, they're sharp and, we'll use them. So, if that's the message you can take back, that this is very serious, the rates are alarming to us, but given, the way that you've worked with city staff and your representations here today about your willingness to go back, I'm willing to extend the benefit to the city, that they're going to take this seriously and get this stuff done. So with that, I think that I'm more inclined to support the WDR with the late changes.
Any further comments?
Carl, could we have a vote just on this section and then a vote on?
Sure, we can.
Actually, I have a follow-up question. So Bob made a good point, or Board Member Snyder made a good point that if we add this in, could there be the potential that we might actually delay a lot of the requirements that we wanted to actually put into place if we find out in a whole year that they're actually not going to be following provision 28?
Let me explain, because I think it does get confusing. Most of the requirements that we're focused on today fall into basically two sides. One of the sides is the nitrate issues, and this does not affect the nitrate issues whatsoever. Those timelines are going forward. This really just pertains to the pretreatment program. And I think I wouldn't even be suggesting this language if staff wasn't telling me that, there's a good chance that they don't have any issues as far as their pretreatment program, but they haven't been able to verify that. And this gives them the option to verify that there aren't any issues. They don't need a comprehensive pretreatment program. But I think that there's also, in writing this, it's a conscious choice to leave in provisions F16, F17, and F18. If they are not able to come up with the requirements of this survey, then those provisions are in full force and effect, and they will have to come back to us with a full pretreatment ordinance, demonstrate that they're doing the pretreatment monitoring, including taking samples at the facilities where they need to take samples. And a lot of that would kind of put the discretion on you in an enforcement context, whether they meet those requirements or not.
Okay, thank you.
And that's basically, as I understood this to be, staff believes there is a de minimis issue there, but that needs to be verified.
Could be.
But it needs to be verified. And if it ain't de minimis, then everything else is in effect.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's important they get on with the survey because we need that information. So, Bob, I don't know, you called for a vote just on this?
Well, I oppose this, but if it, when we come to if the board supports this, then I might support the motion for the.
Right, I think you've heard two board members state they support it. I support it also. Sandra, what are your feelings? Sandra supports it, so without a formal vote, I think you have four board members saying they
Okay,
support
well, I
it.
just have to decide if I'm going to support the motion. For that.
Okay, very good. Any further discussion? Yes.
No, but I would move to approve the WDR with the late revisions that we've just discussed.
Do I have a second?
That's the entire
Yeah.
WDR with these late revisions
And there were
as
some
to,
additional late
Yeah.
revisions.
The late and late revisions.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to clarify, because there was a number of things that are being talked about. We're talking about keeping the schedules in the WDRs the same, keeping the heat on them to give us what you have if you can't
That's
make
correct.
that schedule.
That's correct.
Adding this provision here and making the revisions to the response to comments to address the CV SALT concerns.
That's correct.
and so that is my motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Carmen has moved, and Jenny has seconded the WDR with the late and late revisions, as Patrick had us clarify. This is a voice vote. All in favor state so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no.
I'll do a reluctant aye.
We had a reluctant no. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
Yeah, I did say reluctant aye.
Oh, a reluctant aye. Motion carries unanimously. But Mr. Mulligan, this board obviously has some very deep concerns. And I think the board really tried to work with the city today. You're not on schedule. I don't think you can expect us to be quite as lenient, and I think we were lenient today to addressing a very serious issue. And so thank you very much for your appearance in front of us. We appreciated being able to work with you, and we appreciate I think your desire to work with us. With that said, we'll move on to item number 7. This is the time and place for hearing to consider renewal of the MPDS permit for the City of Clovis sewage treatment and water reuse facility in Fresno County. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you. The designated party is City of Clovis. Total times allowed for testimony and cross-examination are as follows. Regional Board staff, 10 minutes. City of Clovis, 10 minutes. All other persons or interested persons shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, whether you've taken the oath before you testify. Does council have any legal issues at this time?
Just one very minor housekeeping issue. We did get a late comment letter from an interested person, a member of the public, Mr. Hodges. It's a 1-paragraph response. It's of a non-technical nature. It addresses a smaller set of concerns that were already raised by Mr. Varney that are already admitted as comments as part of the board package, and so with that I would recommend admitting the late letter into the administrative record. I'll hand out copies and I'll leave some extras for members of the public if they're interested on the table.
Thank you, and we'll admit it into the record based upon your advice. We'll now begin with testimony by staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer, and I have taken the oath. We do have a staff presentation, but are not planning on giving it unless something occurs that we're not expecting. The proposed renewal of the Clovis NPDS permit is contested by Civiqua, as you can see from the materials in your agenda. These issues have either been resolved or are part of long-standing disagreements between the board and Civiqua. We haven't done anything different in this permit on those issues that we haven't done before. So unless at some point the board or the state board or courts tell us to do something different, we're not going to be changing our recommendations. As I understand it, Civiqua is not planning on providing testimony on those issues. You should have before you a page of late revisions concerning the City of Clovis, and I will go over those. Give you a moment to find them. Okay. The first late revision at the top of the page deals with whether or not the NPDS permit applies to collection systems. Collection systems are already covered by a state board general waste discharge requirement, so we are removing this statement from the permit provision that says that the collection system is part of the treatment system and is covered by the NPDS permit. So basically in the first one, it deletes a paragraph that makes the NPDS permit applicable to the collection system. The second late revision deals with a Civiqua concern that was only brought up about 2 weeks ago. This was after the written comment period, in fact after the agenda was published, so there is nothing in your agenda concerning this issue. The proposed Clovis permit uses a basin plan, the basin plan narrative toxicity objective as one reason for having disinfection requirements. Although this isn't the first time we've ever had this justification in an NPDS permit, it is the first time Civiqua has brought it up as an issue. And Civiqua, as I mentioned, this came up very recently, so it is not included in Civiqua's written comments in the agenda. Although staff believes that it is appropriate to use the narrative toxicity objective to support disinfection requirements, this is a new issue, and I'm recommending for this permit that the reference to the narrative toxicity objective supporting disinfection requirements be removed. There are other adequate justifications in the permit to support it, so I don't feel that we are significantly weakening the permit by this change. Staff would like to work with Civiqua on this to better understand their concerns. We work with Civiqua on any number of issues. Sometimes we can come to agreement and it doesn't become an issue before the board. Sometimes we don't come to an agreement, but it allows us to clarify the issues and bring a much more organized discussion to the board. Since this issue only came up 2 weeks ago, we have not had a chance to meet with Civiqua, so we wouldn't be presenting either side presenting good arguments if in fact we are still in disagreement. So the proposed changes at the bottom on the late revision page would strike 1/2 of a sentence from the fact sheet that refers to the narrative toxicity objective for the disinfection requirements. If we do, once we meet with Civiqua on this, if it is still an issue we're in disagreement on, I would foresee this coming back at a future board meeting in another permit action, again, fully developed with materials in your agenda in advance, so you can make a more reasoned discussion on this. This concludes my oh, and by the way, we will probably, tomorrow we will be making very similar recommendations on a few other NPDS permits regarding the narrative toxicity statement. This concludes my comments. I recommend adoption of the Clovis permit with late revisions to strike the references to narrative toxicity objectives as it relates to disinfection and remove the statement that the collection system is covered by the NPDS permit. I'd like to enter the case file, agenda materials, late revisions, and my comments into the records of this hearing. And are there any questions?
Any questions? Very good.
Thank you.
Does City of Clovis wish to cross-examine? Thank you. We're ready now then for testimony by the City of Clovis.
Hi, Lisa Cohen, City of Clovis. I'd just like to say thank you, and I hope you will adopt the permit as presented to you.
Thank you very much. Closing statement by staff.
You might want to ask if there's anybody from the public first.
Well, that would be a good idea, and I keep going over that. I don't have a card, and that's my mistake. Yeah, there is a person from the public I'd like to have come up here. Debbie?
Hi, Chair Longley.
Yes, you know, and for the record, you are Debbie Webster, Civiqua.
Wait, who's testifying here? I need to know.
You know, I looked at that, and personally, I thought a good argument could be made for leaving it in as it is, but finally went with staff on what they're suggesting. What is your objection?
We have two issues, and one is a very long-standing issue about using, and we've talked to the board about it. It's actually been brought up before, about using best professional judgment when there's no reasonable potential, and in order to trigger an effluent limit. So I don't want to get into that because we have been talking.
Well, you're going to talk, okay.
So we could talk about that if you'd like to,
But so what really comes down is the difference between RFP and best professional judgment, is that?
Well, that's the, yeah, well, reasonable potential, yes.
Reasonable potential
the
and best
processes.
professional judgment, right?
Yes, yes, in order to trigger an effluent. So that's
Okay.
one issue. The second issue, which if it's been in other permits, I apologize, but it was more, and this is what Ken didn't want to get into because we could have a whole debate right now. We don't want to necessarily do it
I
in
just
that.
want to know what you guys are going to be talking about.
Is whether or not pathogens are a toxic constituent. And this is a technical, this is a definitional, this is one of those things that, is it a toxic constituent or not? Does it fall under that basin plan provision? We say no. We think the SAC regional order supports that. There's other thoughts there. So I really want to respect what Ken says because we do.
Okay.
We try to work these
Well,
things out.
look
So
for
that's
you-
the other issue.
We'll look for you to come back. I was just
Okay.
curious. And by the way, I do think it is, can fit under toxic, just as things. As
Okay,
for
we
just-
can
yeah.
have that discussion offline too. So.
Good,
All
good,
right, thank you.
very good. Thank you. Any further questions for Debbie? Thank you. Anybody else wishing to, from the public wishing to testify? Thank you very much. We'll then close the hearing, not close the hearing, we'll take closing statement by staff.
I recommend adoption with the late revision.
Good. Any discussion? If not, I'm in for a motion.
I would move to approve with the late revision.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Jenny Carmen's moved, Jenny second with the late revisions. All in favor state so by saying aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions, motion carries. Thank you. We're ready now to go to the next agenda item, which is Forward Inc., agenda item number 8, which is Forward Inc. and Republic Services Inc. Forward Class Landfill Class 2 operation closure and corrective action in San Joaquin County. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider revision of the closure and corrective action waste discharge requirements for the Forward Landfill Class 2 operation in San Joaquin County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? I see nobody here. Very good. Since there is no one present to contest the matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials in the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
There is one page of late revisions. I don't know if it's been specifically handed out to board members or not. I also wanted to point out one late comment letter that we did receive from Shoot Mahali and Weinberger that came in on Tuesday, just before 5 o'clock. The letter raises some issues. When I sought to get some closure from counsel on the issue, he expressed to me over the phone that he was not going to show up to contest the permit and that his client wasn't going to show up to contest the permit. It's a 10-page letter. There are some technical issues raised in the letter. As the board chair, you certainly have the discretion to decide whether you want to admit the late comment letter into the record. Assuming that you do, I'd like to give the board a little bit of time to digest that and what, if anything, you may want to do in response to the comment letter.
Has staff had an opportunity to look at the comment letter?
Yes, they have.
And does staff have any reply to the comment letter?
I'll let staff speak specifically on that, but I do believe they have some form of a response, yes.
Hi, this is Rob Busby, supervising engineer and geologist, taking the oath. As in the past couple hours, staff have incorporated some some draft revisions, late revisions.
Just a minute. I didn't give the oath.
Go ahead and administer.
Okay.
Pardon?
You can go ahead and administer it now.
That's right. Is what you're about to say the truth? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Good, go ahead.
So what staff have just drafted some additional late revisions to address the late comments that David was just describing.
Dr. Longley, what I'd like to start with first is I'd like to get a decision on whether in fact you want the letter to be admitted as part of the administrative record. And assuming you make a ruling to do so, then I think it'd be
Board
more
members have
appropriate to get into the details.
Board members have had a chance to look at the letter. I looked at it earlier and commented to David. I think it has some valid points in it.
I don't think the board members themselves have had an opportunity to review this particular late comment letter. This late comment letter was received at approximately 4:47 p.m. on Tuesday. There was a previous letter that Chute Mahali did submit as part of the record that is admitted and that staff responded to in a letter from Mr. Atkinson, I believe, dated 6 January. But this February 4th letter is a brand spanking new letter.
Mayville board members, okay. I've looked at the letter. I think it has some very valid points. So I'll rule to admit the letter to the record. And the question becomes now, is this an issue that we need to continue? Or is it one that we can continue to hear today? And David, if you could advise on that.
Well, again, I think it depends on the extent to which staff believe that they can work with the discharger to fashion some findings in response to the letter. I don't know what the scope of staff's proposed suggested changes are. I'm presuming they will probably cover the first 4 issues specifically raised in the letter from Chute Mahali from February 4th. If staff is so inclined to make some late revisions to the permit based on those comments, my suggestion is that perhaps we could take a brief recess, work up what those findings look like, and then we can bring it back.
And I've accepted it into the record. Could you please make copies available to members of the board?
We'll do so.
Could we move to the next item in the interim and then have lunch, and then we can follow up on this real quickly?
We can do that, I think, in a minute. I think, first of all, we need to get this in front of us. And
And it is a fairly long letter, but if the board is inclined, the letter's been admitted as part of the administrative record. If the board is inclined to consider additional late findings based on the comment letter, that's certainly within the discretion of the board. And again, I don't know what the scope of staff's proposed changes are, but at least for purposes of assisting the board, you may want to look specifically at the first 4 comments that are raised in section 1 on pages 1 through, I think 3 it is. There are 4 specific issues raised. One, I think, is just a fairly minor tweak, wording tweak. One pertains to dissolved oxygen. One pertains to nitrogen loading. And I think the last comment has to do with drying procedures as to the cannery rinsate mud.
Board member Schneider has requested that we move to the next item and continue this till this afternoon. I think that other board members may want to have time to read it too. I've read it, so I know what the letter says. But, I'll honor that. And David, I think, has done a good job of summarizing the issues raised in this letter. With that said, we'll continue this item until after lunch.
And that gives staff time, we get something back and their response in writing, hopefully.
That's right. That's right.
That's correct. It's my understanding that the discharger is here as well. So we'll certainly be working with them, I presume, to come up with some findings that we can all agree to.
We already have a draft, so we can start working with them on that then.
Good. And so we'll hear this after lunch. Moving on to agenda item 9, this is the City of Lincoln wastewater treatment and reclamation facility. It's uncontested and it will be heard tomorrow, though. Agenda item number 10, Tuolumne Utilities District, Sonora Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant, Tuolumne County. This is the time and place for hearing to consider rescission of the MPDS permit and time schedule order for the Sonora Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant in Tuolumne County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this issue? Very good, thank you. Find out where I need to go. Since there are persons present wishing to contest this item, we will proceed with the hearing. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of a public hearing and meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you. The designated party is Tuolumne Utilities District. The total times allowed for testimony and cross-examination are as follows. Regional Board staff 15 minutes, Tuolumne Utilities District 5 minutes. All other persons or interested persons and shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before you testify. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
None at this time.
Thank you. We'll now begin with testimony by staff.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Dania Jimerson. I am a staff engineer in the MPDS program of the Rancho Cordova office, and I have taken the oath. This next item for your consideration is a rescission of the MPDS permit and time schedule order for the Tuolumne Utilities District's Sonora Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Jamestown Sanitary District's Wastewater Treatment Plant. The Tuolumne Utilities District, which I will be referring to as TUD, is located in Sonora, about 50 miles east of Stockton, as shown in red circle here. TUD owns and operates the Sonora Regional Wastewater Treatment Plants. The Jamestown Sanitary District is located about 3 miles south of the Sonora plant and independently owns and operates the Jamestown Wastewater Treatment Plant. The two facilities store secondary treated disinfected water effluent in Quartz Reservoir, which is operated by TUD prior to distribution for reclamation. The Sonora and Jamestown wastewater treatment plants serve a population of about 25,000 and 3,000 respectively. The median household income in this area is about $47,000 per year, and the current sewer rate is about $36 per month. The Sonora plant has a design capacity of 2.6 MGD, and the Jamestown provides 0.3 MGD. The total average dry weather flow capacity of the two plants combined is 2.9 million gallons per day. The secondary disinfected discharge from both plants enters Quartz Reservoir, which has a storage capacity of approximately 1,600 acre-feet. The main method of disposal is irrigation of pasture and forage lands, with the storage in Quartz Reservoir during the winter time. Quartz Reservoir and the reclamation system are regulated under separate land WDRs and a master reclamation permit. TUD also has an MPDS permit which allows the seasonal discharge from Quartz Reservoir to Woods Creek from December 1st through May 15. The permit only allows the creek discharge when Woods Creek provide at least a 20-to-1 flow ratio. Discharges to Wood Creek have only been needed during high rainfall years when there is insufficient capacity and irrigation demands are low. TUD discharged to Woods Creek only one season during the last 6 years. In the next 3 slides, I will be discussing facility upgrades that TUD has made to cease surface water discharges completely and their justification for the rescission of the NPDES permit and related TSO. TUD was first issued an NPDES permit in 2001 due to insufficient storage capacity. The permit was renewed in October 2008 and included new effluent limits for copper, zinc, and ammonia. TUD was unable to meet these new limits. A time schedule order was provided and TUD conducted a feasibility study to evaluate alternatives to provide treatment to comply with the new limits or expand a land application to cease discharges to Woods Creek. The selected alternative was to expand effluent storage and irrigation areas, which will eliminate creek discharges. These alternatives meet the board's goal for reclamation and reuse. TUD completed the necessary upgrades in 2013 and has requested a rescission of the NPDES permit and time schedule order. TUD has provided justification for the rescission, which includes completed improvements on Quartz Reservoir to increase the storage capacity by 175 acre-feet. I will show a picture of the Quartz Reservoir on the next slide. Added approximately 53 acres of irrigation area. Over the past few years, and TUD has also submitted a water balance demonstrating sufficient storage and disposal capacity is now available. This is a picture of Quartz reservoirs taken at the end of August. This structure on the right is the outlet tower to transfer and control the flow that is coming out of the reservoir. The elevation of the outlet gates was limiting the amount of water that could be used for irrigation. TUD installed a floating pump that allows the water to be drawn down, expanding the storage capacity by 175 acre-feet. Timely comments supporting the rescission were received from the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center, the Twine Heart Community Services District, and Jamestown Sanitary District. We also received comments from the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, or CISPA. All timely comments have been addressed and responses are included in the agenda package. In the next several slides, I will discuss CISPA's comments, which will be shown in yellow, and staff responses will be shown in white. CISPA's first comment was that they believe TUD has not fully complied with the schedule in the TSO. CISPA claims that TUD did not implement the proposed project from their 2009 feasibility study, specifically a portion of their Phase 1 project, and did not submit a report of waste discharge to update the land WDRs. Without this information, CISPA believes that neither the board nor TUD is in a position to say with certainty whether the proposal for 100% land disposal could be accomplished by TUD in an environmentally protective manner. Staff does not agree. The Phase 1 project from its 2009 feasibility study, which is also described in the TSO, includes improvements to Quartz Reservoir, addition of land application area, and the lining of the Rosasco Pond to add storage capacity. As I discussed earlier, TUD completed these first two projects to increase storage and disposal capacity. After further evaluation of the water balance, it was determined that the additional storage in the Rosasco pond was not needed. So for that reason, TUD did not complete this portion of the project. Regarding the report of waste discharge, CISPA is correct. The TSO requires submittal of this report to evaluate the need to update the WDRs. However, based on the final compliance project completed by TUD, a report of waste discharge is not needed. TUD has submitted sufficient information for board staff to evaluate the need to update the WDRs. Thus, staff determined that this requirement has been met. CISPA also contends that TUD has not sufficiently shown it can contain all wastewater on land, and thus the NPDES permit still is required. Staff does not agree. Without an NPDES permit, the WDRs require the facility has sufficient storage for all wastewater, design seasonal precipitation, inflow, and infiltration for 1 in 100-year rainfall season. TUD submitted a water balance that shows that not only they can meet this design condition, they can store water for 2 of these high rainfall years in a row. The water balance was based on conservative assumptions using existing storage capacity and land application areas. Finally, CISPA contends that TUD existing land disposal operations are not meeting ground limits and that the impacts of adding more discharges to land are unknown. CISPA's groundwater comments might be valid concerns. However, these issues are currently being addressed by board staff through evaluation of TUD compliance with the current WDR requirements and evaluation if an update of the WDRs is necessary. The comments regarding the WDR and the potential impacts to groundwater are irrelevant to the action of rescinding the NPDES permit. No changes in discharge to groundwater will occur if the permit is rescinded. TUD operates its facilities to maximize land disposal. Sufficient storage capacity is available to eliminate discharges to surface water. These facilities will be used to their maximum extent regardless of whether the permit is rescinded. Before I conclude my presentation, I would like to bring to your attention a matter of legal importance regarding the permit. CISPA is contesting the rescission of an NPDES permit that is no longer in effect because the permit expired in October of last year. Since TOD was transitioning to a 100% land disposal system, a request was submitted requesting the rescission of the permit and TSO. Therefore, TUD did not submit an application for renewal of the permit. Since the permit expired and a complete application for renewal was not submitted, the permit is no longer in effect, and TUD cannot legally discharge to surface water. The proposed permit rescission is merely to officially rescind the permit for record-keeping purposes.
So the implication of that is what? If they do discharge, what's the result?
If they discharge, then they're in violation of discharging without a permit.
Exactly, and what typically happens?
We exercise our enforcement discretion.
Exactly, okay.
They are also subject to third-party lawsuits.
That's an important point, too.
That is an important point.
Very good.
With that, this concludes my presentation. Staff recommends adoption of the proposed rescission of the NPDES permit and time schedule order. Staff would like to enter into the record this presentation, the agenda package, and the Central Valley Water Board files for this facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members of the board?
We have some issues here that are tangentially related, but I just wanted to put them out there for the board to think about as we move through different stuff. One is, you know, it's a lot easier for water quality, I think, generally speaking, and for the people that need to comply with regulations to, you know, to go to a land discharge. But there are impacts here maybe that I don't totally understand when you reduce all discharges to some of these smaller water bodies or creeks and rivers. What are the consequences of that on the riparian habitat or the fisheries or other issues? We're not kind of looking sometimes at that other side of the issue, I think. And this is brought up partly because in one of the communications I had is, you know, with the drought, people are looking at, can we have less dilution and still discharge? And that may create some water quality impacts. It certainly uses up maybe the assimilative capacity in that particular water body that somebody else might be thinking about also. But this effluent discharge may be all that's happening in some regards to these water bodies in this drought period. So I think when we look at emergency considerations through the drought, we may be faced with more of these issues. The other comment is just in terms of, which relates to climate change and issues, a 100-year event, I'm beginning to think may not be adequate in our region. I think we should be thinking of 200-year events that
Or
occur
or
at a
500,
minimum.
yeah.
Because what I've read is we're looking at, you know, maybe less total flow, but more increased
well-
intensity of the events that occur.
Right, if I could just interrupt
Well,
on
I got one
that.
more, and then you can interrupt me.
No, just one second. On your, while you're talking about the 100-year event, we've been in a wet period, the climatologists are telling us. And so that 100-year event may be in the longer picture, not a 100-year event, much larger as you're implying.
Yeah, and these events, you know, may be rarer, but they may be more intensive.
Exactly.
And the other one is, I know that in this drought period, we're starting to look at reduced minimum flows, for instance, at dams or, you know, other where they have a minimum flow coming out, and there's going to be requests for reducing those flows, and there's going to be impacts on water quality from those things. And a lot of the emergency regulations will provide that, and a lot of reasons, while it may provide some short-term damage in the long term, if these flows at least continue for don't totally dry up, you know, maybe that's a compromise we have to be looking at. So, sorry, I didn't mean to interject them here, but it seems in some respects appropriate. So, thanks for listening.
I think they're very appropriate, and in fact, on that other issue, on whether it's 100-year or some other period, when you do come back and talk to us in your presentation, I think it'd be very appropriate to address that at that time. In that particular, I'd like to, yes, if you could address this issue of stream flow at that point?
Certainly, that's what I was wanting to speak to. Woods Creek is an ephemeral stream, and a lot of the Sierra foothills are ephemeral. And one of the things we look at for NPDES permits to these streams is that they are not disrupting the natural condition of the stream. So a stream that is supposed to be dry and not necessarily supposed to be dry because of an upstream diversion or something, but a lot of them are naturally dry. So if you introduce water on a year-round basis, you would change the types of plants, you change the types of frogs, you change a lot of things. So one of the considerations that went into the permit that we're requesting you to rescind never did allow a summertime discharge. There are other permits certainly that when they discharge year-round, even if there wasn't a habitat there, it may have become established, and that's part of what has to be looked at. Also, in terms of water rights, a year-round discharge has to get permission from the Division of Water Rights to make sure no one downstream has become dependent upon that water for irrigation water or something. So they're looked at both from an environmental standpoint and a water rights standpoint before the permits are rescinded.
And I do appreciate the expertise and diligence of our staff. Thanks.
Okay.
Any further comments? Okay. Thank you very much. Does TUD wish to cross-examine? Very good. Then we'll take testimony from TUD.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Tom Shays. I am the General Manager for Tuolumne Utilities District from Sonora, California. I have taken the oath. First thing I'd like to do is thank staff for their diligent work. Obviously, Ms. Jimerson has spent a lot of time reviewing all of our data and is very comfortable with the facts that we presented. What I'm going to show you are 4 short slides. I think she did a very complete job. This first one is right out of our permit, which we have complied with. We expanded our land disposal to dispose of all of our recycled water. We have also seen our wastewater flows diminish since about 2009, based upon our water conservation. The governor's 20% by 2020, our area has certain goals, and we have met those goals for the last 3 years. So we plan on continuing to do that. As was pointed out, this is a regional system. Jamestown Sanitary District and Twain Harte Community Services District flow into, well, Twain Harte, excuse me, we treat their sewage, and Jamestown flows into Quartz Reservoir. Both of these agencies that are providing financial support for this project are in favor. And Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center, they protested when we got this permit, or applied for this permit, strongly. And they now are very supportive, as you see in their quote, of us having this permit rescinded. We do have one person that is protesting. They also protested when we got our permit. They did not want us to get it, but particularly what they wanted us to do was eliminate the waste discharge to the surface water, which we have done and will continue to do. And we're very comfortable. And the comment on climate change, I think, is very interesting because we also provide water services to our community, and I'm dealing with the drought extensively in the other part of my job. But our water balance assumes a 1 in 100-year return period storm. In our case, would be about 59 inches of rain every year, and we can handle that. And lastly, in addition to the project that you heard about completely, which is the photo on the left at a little different period, we've also purchased 140 acres. We've done the preliminary engineering and geotechnical studies in consultation with the Division of Safety of Dams. We have a site for an additional 165 acre-feet of storage. So we are prepared for the next 30 years of growth and beyond. And the district is requesting adoption of this rescission, and I would like this little presentation to be entered into the record. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you very much, sir. And staff has no questions either, is that correct? Very good. At this point, we're ready for interested parties. I have a card from Drevitt Hunt, representing Kalispell. I don't think your mic's on.
All right. Thank you, Chairman and members of the board and staff. Particularly, I'd like to thank Ms. Jimerson for, I thought, a very fair characterization of CISPA's comments. And for the most part, I don't think we necessarily disagree that TUD is making steps towards a complete and environmentally protective waste disposal operation. However, there's a couple of things that I think are really important, and one of them, fundamentally, what it relates to is the storage of the groundwater or storage of the water in Quartz Reservoir while it's waiting land application. In 2002, this board issued the master reclamation requirements and required that TUD study the impacts of its operations to groundwater. That was supposed to be completed by 2005. A study was finally produced in 2009, around the same time as the feasibility study that you might have heard of earlier today. That study only assessed the impacts at the outlying storage spawns and at some of the land application sites themselves. It did not assess the impacts at Quartz Reservoir, where the bulk of this water is stored for the bulk of the time that it's potentially impacting groundwater. The time schedule order in 2010 had a series of requirements which we disagree that they were all complied with and certainly not timely, as you've heard. But one of the most important ones was that there be a request and a report of waste discharge submitted to reevaluate the master reclamation requirements to see if in fact they were going to be protective. That was never submitted. Staff has said that they have a lot of the information, maybe all of it, that they need, but there's a whole process that's associated with that where the board takes these things under consideration and looks at it and truly evaluates whether that is in fact the proposal is the most environmentally protective option available, is going to do what it's supposed to do, is the economically beneficial and efficient option available. And I implore this board, in the event that it's determined to rescind the MPDS permit, which I don't think is appropriate for a couple reasons I'll explain, but in any event, if you do not agree with me and determine to rescind the permit, at least require Tuolumne Utilities District to in fact complete that study of that storage pond area where they store 1,600 acre feet or whatever the number is of water for an extended period of time over fractured bedrock in a ravine that is directly tributary to Woods Creek. At the base of the reservoir, there's a wetland area where the seep comes up from underneath. There's little ranchettes and small communities of people that live nearby. There's definitely potential for impacts to groundwater here, and it would be a shame if the board didn't make TUD follow through on what it's already required it to do, and that is to study that impact to groundwater. So if I could just take 10 seconds, or maybe probably 30.
Go ahead.
I think the reason why not to rescind the permit at this point, and just to be clear, the submission for the rescission was required in the time schedule order in order for the board to have this opportunity to consider this. It's not just a record-keeping thing. It was part of the idea behind the time schedule order. In any event, it requires monitoring of discharges if they occur. It requires reporting of those. It requires communication with your staff, with other folks, if there are discharges, to make sure they're not harming the environment, and if they are, to make sure that we do things about them. It also requires an elevated level of treatment of the wastewater, which, if it's going to sit in that pond until we really figure out what's happening, let's at least make sure that it's treated to the best level that it can be treated so that the impacts that are occurring are lessened, or the least that they can be. So with that, I thank you, and I again implore you to make Tuolumne study the impacts of Quartz Reservoir to groundwater.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from members of the board? I'll be asking for staff response to the comments that were just made by Mr. Hunt. But in the meantime, does anybody have questions or comments? If staff could give a response to Mr. Hunt's comments, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. My name is Adam Lapis, NPDS Program Manager. First, on the report of waste discharge, we do have the information that we need to update the waste discharge requirements. And I know that to initiate that the new waste discharge requirements, we have that information. So we don't necessarily need the report of waste discharge. As far as the storage reservoir goes, the Quartz Reservoir, I would say that the 2009 report and asking for the discharger to evaluate the discharge from Quartz Reservoir, we don't disagree with that. But the action to rescind the NPDS permit, it doesn't have any bearing on that issue. We can't, if we keep the NPDS permit in place, which it's not in place, it's already expired, but if we were to keep that permit in place, it wouldn't force that issue to occur, and we can't force the discharge to surface water by that discharger. So I would say that our waste discharge, they are under waste discharge requirements, and that is the appropriate mechanism to regulate the discharge to groundwater.
Thank you. Any questions, members of the board? If not, we'll go to closing comments by TUD. Closing comments by staff.
I have none. Thank you.
And recommendation from the executive officer.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. There is a difference here. There's the NPDES permit that's required under the Clean Water Act for discharges of surface water. And when we have a permit or a discharger who discharges both to surface water and land, we combine our two orders that are authorized under the California Water Code and the Clean Water Act into one permit. And at times it's confusing because it looks like it's all NPDES, but we do have groundwater requirements and surface water requirements. What you're rescinding are the surface water requirements, which have a whole set of rules around what we need to do and application requirements and things that we cannot do unless we have those applications. Under the California Water Code, we have a little more flexibility, and the issues raised by CSPA and are legitimate concerns, but we can handle those under the California Water Code, and I can issue orders as well to have them start doing investigations if we think they're necessary to be done. That's a whole separate issue to be addressed in terms of the groundwater, and we do not need an NPDES permit for that. And so for that reason, I do recommend that we rescind the NPDES permit as recommended by staff, and we'll move forward with the groundwater program protection as they develop and update the waste discharge requirements.
And the time schedule order as well.
Time schedule order.
Thank you very much.
Are we doing any monitoring of this storage area with monitoring wells at all
I'm
now?
pretty certain we're going to be doing a lot of this. That
So
if
this
we
would
haven't
be in
already,
the-
I don't know what the current requirements are in there on the groundwater.
But when those come back, that's something that might be considered.
Yes, and we can actually, if it's not there, we can issue an order under my authority to have them start.
And they're currently monitoring wells also at that site.
Any further questions, concerns by the members of the board? If not, we'll close the hearing and proceed to discussion and voting. Any comments?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Bob's moved. Sandra seconded. This is a voice vote. We'll go all in favor of the motion, say so by saying aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Motion passes.
I have one other process issue. Sometimes, like if I have questions about, where are we on this project, is just a report in the EO's report a good place to address those sort of ongoing issues? And
Certainly.
yeah, thanks.
Agenda item 8, Forward Inc. and Republic Services Inc. It's the Forward landfill. We're going to take that up immediately after lunch, and following that item, we will go to agenda item 10. Agenda item 11, which is the Reeve Road Heifer Ranch, San Joaquin County. And we are adjourned
Doctor,
until...
Just want to quickly announce before we recess for lunch that the board will be meeting in closed session to discuss item M on page 5 of the agenda announcement, and that's the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District versus the Central Valley Water Board and State Water Board.
And with that, we are adjourned
Carl,
until...
when we come back, are we doing the continuation of this?
Yes.
And then we're doing the last item?
That's
11?
correct.
Okay, got it.
And we'll be back on or about 1 o'clock.